Hello, welcome to the Learn English Lab. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on something that is incredibly practical and, for many, deeply transformative. How to truly enhance your English speaking skills. This isn't going to be a dry discussion about just, rote learning grammar rules or trying to stuff your brain with endless lists of vocabulary. It's about something much more dynamic, unlocking your confidence, finding your voice, and making genuine connections with others through speaking.
That's absolutely right. We've been exploring a wealth of insights and strategies compiled from extensive experience working with language learners over many years. It's material that has been tested and proven in countless real-world scenarios, drawing not only on student experiences, but also the perspectives of educators and, language learners themselves.
So we're looking at what really makes a difference when it comes to speaking, beyond just the nuts and bolts of the language itself. It seems clear from these insights that speaking effectively is far more than just knowing words or grammar structures in theory. It's about using them spontaneously, dynamically, with assurance, and ultimately connecting with other human beings.
A crucial point right from the start is that this isn't just one thing you work on, it's a process that involves multiple layers. There are the technical aspects of the language, yes, but perhaps even more powerfully, it involves your internal state, your mindset, your comfort level, and fundamentally your confidence.
Okay, let's unpack this. Over the course of this deep dive, our mission is to explore what the most common challenges are that people face when they want to speak English better. We'll really dig into that foundational mindset that's needed for progress. Dive into practical techniques for creating immersion, building an English environment right around you, and talk about how to approach technical skills like grammar and vocabulary in a way that actually helps your speaking. We'll look at specific ways to tackle those frustrating obstacles that inevitably pop up on the journey, touch on some advanced strategies for communicating with more sophistication, and even discuss how technology can be a powerful ally. It's all drawn directly from the practical, tested insights we've been examining. Let's begin by looking at some of the fundamental hurdles that these materials highlight. It's a scenario many learners describe. They might have a strong grasp of English grammar and vocabulary on paper. They can read complex texts, perhaps understand a lot when listening. But when it comes time for actual spontaneous conversation, they freeze up or struggle significantly.
That gap between understanding and producing language in real time is incredibly common. And the insights point very strongly to a few key factors driving this struggle, what stands out as perhaps the biggest barrier.
The fear factor is identified as arguably the primary obstacle. This isn't just mild nervousness. For many, it's a deeply paralyzing anxiety that prevents them from even trying to speak.
And this fear manifests in a variety of ways, doesn't it? Think about it. There's the intense fear of making a mistake, of saying something grammatically wrong or using the wrong word. This can make you overly cautious. Then there's the fear of not being understood at all, which can feel incredibly vulnerable. Some people worry about sounding awkward or unintelligent, and there's often a constant undercurrent of concern about being judged by others, maybe by native speakers or even by fellow learners who seem more advanced.
That sounds like a heavy burden to carry into a conversation. And the materials offer a vivid example of how this fear can really shut someone down, the story of Maria.
Maria's case is really illustrative. She was described as a brilliant engineer, someone whose technical English skills, her reading, her comprehension were by all accounts excellent. Yet in her very first attempts at speaking practice, she was barely audible. She would whisper her responses, her body language conveying immense tension, and she would repeatedly interrupt herself to apologize for her English, calling it terrible. The striking observation from the materials was that her English wasn't objectively terrible. It was her fear that was preventing her from demonstrating the English skills she actually possessed.
That really paints a picture of the internal struggle, and it creates this difficult cycle, doesn't it?
It does. The materials describe this as a vicious loop. The more intense your fear of speaking is, the less willing you are to put yourself in situations where you have to practice speaking. And logically, the less you practice, the less experience you gain, which leads to lower confidence.
Right.
That reduced confidence, in turn, feeds the fear, making the cycle even harder to break.
It just spirals. Another significant hurdle mentioned is what's termed the perfectionist trap.
Ah, yes. This is the trap of wanting every single word, every single grammar structure, every single aspect of your pronunciation to be absolutely flawless before you even open your mouth. While attention to detail is valuable, this relentless pursuit of absolute perfection in the moment of speaking can make your communication incredibly slow, hesitant, and frankly, unnatural.
And there's a compelling example of this as well, the Lebanese businessman.
Right, Ahmed. The materials describe how Ahmed, a sharp businessman, would spend a significant amount of time, sometimes up to 5 minutes or more, constructing each sentence internally before he would speak it out loud. His intention was noble. He wanted to ensure everything was grammatically correct and perfectly worded. But this internal process made his conversations frustratingly slow and really got in the way of any natural flow or back and forth.
It drives home the point that the purpose of conversation isn't a linguistic exam.
Good point. Real communication prioritizes making a connection, conveying your intended meaning clearly, and ensuring understanding. Obsessing over absolute linguistic flawlessness in real time can actually become a major impediment to that goal. It's about effective communication, not just correct language use in a vacuum.
Then there's the listening-speaking gap. This is something learners mentioned constantly. Maybe you felt this yourself.
It seems to be an almost universal experience in language learning. It's very common to find that you can understand a large amount of spoken or written English, perhaps listen to a podcast and follow the general ideas, or read an article and understand the details. But when you're asked to respond or initiate a conversation yourself, the words just won't come out fluently.
So your brain processes the input fine, but struggles with the output under pressure.
Exactly. The materials share the experience of Lisa from Germany, who articulated this perfectly. "I understand everything you say," she said, "but when I try to respond, my brain just goes blank. It's like all my English disappears." That moment of mental paralysis under pressure is incredibly frustrating. The valuable insight here is that the materials are careful to reassure learners that this isn't a sign of failure. It's a completely normal and expected phase in the process of developing fluency.
That kind of reassurance is vital for anyone experiencing it. Definitely. Finally, the materials touch on cultural communication differences. This isn't something many learners initially think about as a barrier.
No, and yet it's profoundly important for natural and effective communication. Different native cultures have deeply ingrained, often unconscious, communication styles. These styles involve things like how long you pause before speaking, how directly you express disagreement, whether interrupting is rude or a sign of engagement, and even typical topics of conversation. These cultural norms can sometimes clash or feel unnatural when trying to speak English, which has its own set of cultural expectations for interaction.
Could you give us a specific example of how this plays out?
A striking example from the materials involves the experience of Japanese students. In some contexts within Japanese culture, silence can be interpreted as respectful, indicating you are carefully considering what has been said, and interrupting someone, even briefly, is often considered quite rude. Compare this to typical English-speaking conversations, which often involve much shorter pauses between speakers, quicker back-and-forth turns, and sometimes even polite overlaps or interruptions that signal active listening and engagement.
So if your ingrained communication style is to wait for a significant pause before taking your turn, you might find it difficult to participate in a faster-paced English conversation,
Right.
Or feel like you're constantly being cut off.
Just so. Adapting to these differences, understanding the typical rhythm, the subtle cues for turn-taking, how politeness is typically expressed, or the appropriate level of directness in English-speaking contexts, is essential for sounding natural and communicating effectively without unintended friction. It's not about losing your own cultural identity, but about developing the flexibility to navigate the communication norms of the English language environment you're in.
Okay, that gives us a really clear picture of some of the major hurdles. Fear, aiming for impossible perfection, the listening-speaking gap, and cultural clashes. So once we understand these, where do the insights suggest we turn our focus?
The materials strongly suggest starting with the absolute foundation, mindset and confidence. They argue that actively working on your internal state, how you perceive yourself as an English speaker and a learner, can have a dramatic, positive impact on your progress, perhaps even more than focusing only on technical skills. It's not just about training your mouth, it's about training your brain and your emotions.
And a core part of that mindset seems to be embracing imperfection.
This is absolutely fundamental. The materials tell the story of Carlos, a doctor from Colombia who was preparing for demanding medical board exams that required strong English speaking. He was so consumed by the fear of making mistakes that he would constantly stop and restart his sentences, correcting himself mid-thought, which made him incredibly frustrated and hesitant.
That sounds exhausting. How did he manage to shift that?
During one of his practice sessions, his teacher proposed something simple but powerful. They recorded their conversation. Later, they played it back for Carlos. This was a revelation for him. He heard his own voice, he noticed the pauses and the self-corrections, just as he expected. But what struck him even more was that despite what he perceived as numerous mistakes, his core message was consistently clear and easily understood by his teacher.
So hearing it from an external perspective made the difference. A bit of distance.
It was incredibly powerful. It led to a significant breakthrough in his thinking. Carlos realized that the ultimate goal of communication wasn't to achieve some abstract standard of linguistic flawlessness in every single sentence, but to effectively convey his ideas and be understood. From that moment, he consciously focused on getting his message across, allowing himself to make errors if necessary, and his speaking fluency saw remarkable improvement within a surprisingly short period.
That anecdote really underscores that communication is about connecting, not necessarily about perfect grammar in the moment. What about the power of self-compassion?
This concept encourages learners to treat themselves with the same level of understanding, patience, and kindness that they would naturally offer to a friend or family member who is learning your native language. The materials mention Yuki from Japan, who had developed a habit of immediately apologizing whenever she felt she had made a mistake, often saying things like, "Sorry, my English is terrible."
Oh yeah, that kind of negative self-talk is so common and so unhelpful.
It truly is. The strategy here was to help Yuki become aware of that critical internal monologue and learn to replace it with more neutral or constructive responses, or simply to continue speaking without interruption or apology. Instead of, "Sorry, my English is terrible," she might learn to pause briefly and say, "Let me rephrase that," or simply correct herself quickly and move on.
And how did that simple shift impact her speaking?
It was transformative. When you stop spending so much mental energy on self-criticism and judgment, you free up cognitive resources. That allows you to focus that energy on the actual act of communicating, on actively listening to your conversation partner, and on learning from the interaction itself. It allows you to be present in the conversation instead of constantly being inside your own head evaluating your performance.
That makes complete sense. It redirects your energy constructively. And finally, under this crucial mindset section, there's celebrating small wins.
Progress in language learning, especially speaking fluency, often isn't a single dramatic leap. More often, it's a series of small, sometimes almost imperceptible incremental improvements. The materials emphasize the immense importance of recognizing and actively celebrating these seemingly minor moments of progress. This could be something as simple as successfully ordering a coffee without hesitation, managing to tell a short story or joke and having the other person understand and react positively, or even navigating a slightly awkward social interaction smoothly.
It's about acknowledging every step forward, no matter how small, seeing the progress.
Exactly. The suggestions made to keep a simple speaking wins journal. Anna from Russia started doing this, making a quick note at the end of the day or week about any small speaking success, no matter how trivial it felt at the time. Regularly reviewing these entries, especially during moments of frustration or when she felt stuck, provided her with immense motivation. It served as a concrete reminder of how far she had already come and the progress she was making.
So with that crucial foundational mindset in place, embracing imperfection, practicing self-compassion, and actively celebrating progress, we can move on to practical strategies for getting more speaking practice. A major question for many learners, perhaps for you listening right now, is how do you significantly improve your speaking if you don't live in an English-speaking country?
That's a very common and important question. And the materials address this head-on by introducing the concept of creating an immersion mindset. This means intentionally building an English-speaking environment around yourself, regardless of your physical location in the world. It's about actively bringing English into your daily life.
How does someone actually do that? There's a great example provided from Brazil.
Yes, the story of Roberto from Brazil is highlighted as a prime example of someone who made significant strides in his speaking ability without ever leaving São Paulo. His approach was simple, yet highly effective. He started by changing the language settings on his phone, his computer, and his social media accounts to English. He then made a conscious effort throughout his day to think in English, narrating his actions or thoughts internally. And the most interesting part, perhaps, was that he began talking to himself out loud in English.
Talking to yourself. Okay, that does sound a little unconventional to some ears. But the materials refer to this as the art of self-talk and describe it as a surprisingly powerful and often underrated technique.
It's presented as a highly potent way to practice speaking without any external pressure. The author of the materials recounts discovering this technique almost accidentally while learning Spanish, living alone and simply narrating mundane daily activities out loud in Spanish, describing making breakfast, getting dressed, or looking out the window. While it felt a little silly initially, It proved incredibly beneficial for practicing sentence structures, recalling vocabulary, and simply getting the mouth and brain used to producing the language.
And did students find this useful too? Sounds like it could work.
Absolutely. Sarah from Poland, for instance, was quite skeptical when her teacher first suggested she try narrating her morning routine out loud in English while getting ready, but she committed to trying it consistently for just 1 week. To her surprise, after only 7 days, she noticed that forming sentences in English felt significantly more natural and required much less conscious effort.
The beauty is that it's completely private and available anytime, anywhere. Zero pressure.
Exactly. You can describe the view from your window, think through a problem in English, recount something that happened during your day, or even practice imaginary conversations. There's no pressure, no potential for judgment, just pure, consistent speaking practice that builds muscle memory for your mouth and your brain.
Moving from internal practice to external input, the materials also discuss media immersion with a twist, emphasizing the importance of active immersion.
This point addresses the common phenomenon where learners watch hours of English TV or listen to many podcasts, but don't see a proportionate improvement in their speaking. The insight is that simply consuming media passively, while great for listening comprehension, isn't enough to build speaking fluency. The author's own experience learning French illustrated this. Watching films passively helped understanding, but speaking improvement stalled until active engagement began.
What does that active engagement look like with media? How do you make it active?
It involves specific techniques that turn listening practice into speaking practice. This includes pausing frequently to repeat phrases you hear, a technique called shadowing, which involves repeating simultaneously with the speaker like an echo, actively imitating their intonation and rhythm, or even pausing before a character speaks to try and predict what they might say based on the context you've understood.
So you're not just absorbing the language, you're actively producing it in real-time response, making it stick.
Precisely. James from South Korea used this approach specifically with American sitcoms. He found that by actively imitating the dialogue, the speed, and the intonation of the characters, his own natural rhythm in English and the melody of his sentences improved significantly. It's about using authentic input to shape your own output.
And beyond self-talk and engaging with media, the materials emphasize actively creating speaking opportunities.
This is about being creative and proactive in finding chances to speak English, especially when living in an English-speaking country or taking formal classes isn't feasible or affordable. The materials share the example of Elena from Ukraine, who was eager for more speaking practice but couldn't afford regular conversation classes.
How did she come up with her own opportunities? What did she do?
She used readily available technology in a novel way. She started using WhatsApp to record voice messages to herself. She would pretend she was explaining her work projects to an English-speaking colleague, practicing her professional vocabulary, structuring her thoughts, and using relevant sentence patterns. Afterward, she would listen back to these recordings to identify areas where she hesitated or needed to improve her phrasing.
That's a really ingenious way to practice professional English. Very smart.
And another student, Marcus from Germany, found his speaking practice in a less conventional place, online gaming communities. He joined groups where the primary language of communication for coordinating strategy was English. Through these interactions, he naturally picked up on informal expressions, slang, and, crucially, developed the ability to respond quickly and spontaneously in real-time situations, a skill often underdeveloped in more formal learning environments.
So the takeaway here is to be resourceful, look for opportunities in your hobbies, your work, or online, and turn passive activities into moments for active speaking practice. This naturally leads us to the technical side, grammar and vocabulary. The materials acknowledge that while mindset is fundamental, you still need these technical skills, but the approach to learning them for speaking is what really matters.
Right. The focus here shifts from learning grammar and vocabulary as abstract concepts to leaving them as functional tools that serve your communication goals in real interactions. It's a very practical, use-oriented perspective.
And for grammar, it's about seeing it not just as a set of rules, but as a communication tool. How does that work?
Instead of presenting grammar points as rigid structures to be perfectly memorized, the materials advocate teaching them as patterns that effectively facilitate specific communication functions. Consider the present perfect tense, for example.
How would that be approached differently for speaking? What's the practical way?
Instead of starting with a complex definition involving actions that began in the past and continue to the present or have relevance now, the focus is on teaching its practical applications in common speaking situations. For instance, you learn that "I've lived here for 5 years" is a useful way to introduce yourself and provide background, or "Have you ever been to Japan?" is a very common question to start a conversation and find common ground, or "I've just finished my project" is the standard way to give a quick update on completed work.
So directly connecting the grammar structure to a specific, useful communication scenario. Makes sense.
Exactly. The materials mention Patricia from Chile, a project manager, who struggled with using different verb tenses accurately in conversation. Her understanding improved dramatically once they started linking the tenses directly to her specific work needs, describing tasks she had completed, present perfect, projects she was currently working on, present continuous, and plans she would execute, future forms. Seeing how the tenses served her practical communication needs in her job led to a much more natural improvement in accuracy.
That approach makes a lot more intuitive sense for speaking. What about vocabulary? The materials seem quite direct in their criticism of simply memorizing random lists.
Yes, they strongly argue that trying to improve speaking by randomly memorizing long lists of disconnected vocabulary words is largely inefficient and ineffective. Vocabulary acquisition for speaking needs to be much more strategic and directly relevant to your personal life, your professional needs, or your interests.
So focusing on words and phrases you'll actually have a reason to use, not just abstract stuff.
Precisely. The example given is David from India, who is preparing for job interviews in a specific industry. Instead of studying general vocabulary lists, he focused his efforts on learning industry-specific jargon, common interview questions and phrases, and effective expressions for describing his skills and achievements. This highly targeted approach made his study much more efficient and directly contributed to his success in landing the job he wanted.
So building vocabulary around your specific needs and interests seems key. That's really practical.
And the materials suggest creating personal word webs or mind maps around topics relevant to you, and importantly, practicing using that vocabulary in sentences and short speaking tasks. This personal relevance and active practice in context makes words much easier to remember and recall quickly when you need them during spontaneous conversation.
Another technique mentioned, which seems crucial for sounding more fluent and natural, is the chunk method. What's that about?
This is a really insightful observation about how native speakers operate. Fluent speakers don't typically build every single sentence word by word from scratch by consciously applying individual grammar rules. Instead, they rely heavily on prefabricated phrases, common collocations, and idiomatic expressions, what the materials call chunks of language that they've heard and used countless times.
Like using common phrases or set expressions, those things you hear all the time.
Yes. Think about phrases like honestly speaking, to be honest with you, or speaking personally. A non-fluent speaker might try to individually translate and assemble the words honest, speaking, personally. A more fluent speaker uses these as single units, as chunks. You learn and use them together because that's how they commonly appear. Other examples could be, "It's up to you, what do you think?" or "Let me know."
And how does using these chunks help with fluency in the moment? Does it buy you time?
Using chunks makes your speech much more automatic and less hesitant. Because you're using familiar pre-assembled units, you spend less cognitive effort on constructing the basic sentence structure. This frees up your brain to focus on what you want to say, your ideas, and your message. It also provides tiny, crucial moments of thinking time. While you're saying a common chunk, like in my opinion, your brain has a split second to formulate the specific point you want to make next.
The materials share Michelle from France's experience with this method. How did it help her?
Michelle made a conscious effort to collect phrases and chunks she heard in authentic contexts, like work meetings, TV shows, or conversations with English speakers. She organized these not by individual words, but by their function: phrases for agreeing, phrases for disagreeing, ways to introduce a new point, ways to ask for clarification. By actively practicing and incorporating these functional chunks into her speaking, her language became noticeably more natural, faster, and more fluent within just a few months.
Okay, so we've covered the crucial mindset, creating immersion around you and building technical skills like grammar and vocabulary in a functional way. Now, let's move to something that is absolutely essential for being understood: pronunciation. The materials highlight this as crucial, but with an important nuance. The goal is clear communication, not necessarily a perfect native accent.
That distinction is so important. Pronunciation is vital because Even with perfect grammar and an extensive vocabulary, if people can't understand the sounds you're making, communication breaks down. However, striving to eliminate your native accent entirely or sound exactly like a native speaker is often unnecessary and can be counterproductive. The goal is intelligibility, clarity.
So it's about being clear, not necessarily identical to a native speaker from a specific region. Your accent is okay.
Exactly. The materials emphasize understanding your accent. Every speaker brings a unique linguistic background, and this means different native languages present unique pronunciation challenges in English. The key is to identify the specific sounds, stress patterns, or intonation habits from your native language that might interfere with being clearly understood in English, and focus your practice there.
There's a specific example focusing on this idea of clarity over native sound. Tell us about that.
Yes, Rajesh from India. He spoke English with a clear Indian accent, which is a valid and widely understood variety of English. The challenge wasn't his accent itself, but specific sounds and habits that occasionally caused momentary confusion. For listeners less familiar with that accent, things like sometimes confusing V and W sounds, occasionally dropping the final sounds of words, or putting stress on the wrong syllables in a word. Instead of trying to adopt a standard American or British accent, the focus was specifically on working on these few key areas for clarity. Distinguishing V and W, ensuring word endings were pronounced, and practicing correct word stress. His accent remained clearly Indian, but his speech became dramatically clearer and easier for a wider range of listeners to understand.
That's a great way to prioritize. Focus on what impacts understanding. Smart. What about the mirror technique? That sounds a bit unusual. Using a mirror.
It might feel a little strange at first, but practicing speaking in front of a mirror is described as surprisingly effective, especially for working on specific sounds. It provides you with visual feedback. When you're trying to learn new sounds that don't exist in your native language, seeing how your mouth moves, the shape of your lips, and the position of your tongue can be incredibly helpful in confirming if you're physically producing the sound correctly.
Did the author find this helpful personally? Did they try it?
Yes, the author recounts struggling with certain Spanish sounds that weren't in English. They found it difficult to hear the subtle difference between their attempt and a native speaker's. Practicing in front of a mirror allowed them to visually match the mouth movements of native speakers they were imitating, providing that crucial extra feedback loop.
And how did a student use this effectively? Was there a specific case?
Sophia from Bulgaria used the mirror technique to work specifically on English sounds that required noticeable lip rounding, like the vowels in words such as would, should, and could. These sounds were tricky for her. By dedicating just 10 minutes a day to practicing these words in front of her bathroom mirror, focusing on the visual aspect of her mouth shape, she saw significant improvement in the clarity and accuracy of those sounds within just 2 weeks. Beyond individual sounds, the overall sound of English also depends on its distinct rhythm and intonation, which is called prosody. This is the music and beat of the language.
That's something often missed in early language learning, isn't it? We learn the words, but not the tune they're sung to, the melody.
Very much so. And it's crucial for sounding natural and even for being easily understood. The materials mention Han from China. His pronunciation of individual English words was excellent. You could understand every single word he said, but his sentences sounded somewhat robotic or choppy. This was because he was applying the stress pattern of his native language, which involves stressing every word in a sentence equally. English, however, has a characteristic rhythm created by stressing certain syllables in words and certain words in sentences more strongly than others.
So how did he work on finding that English rhythm? What did he practice?
They practiced with simple sentences, focusing on identifying and exaggerating the typical English stress patterns. For instance, instead of saying, "I believe it," stressing all 3 words equally, he would practice saying, "I believe it," or, to express doubt, "I don't believe it," putting the stress on the key information-carrying words. By practicing and even exaggerating these patterns, his English started to sound much more natural, flowed better, and paradoxically became easier for native speakers to process and understand.
That illustrates how the rhythm helps listeners anticipate meaning. It guides them. And finally, for pronunciation practice, there's shadowing, the secret weapon. Sounds intriguing.
Shadowing is consistently highlighted as one of the most effective techniques for improving pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. It involves listening to a native speaker, perhaps on a podcast, a video, or even an audiobook, and speaking along with them simultaneously, trying to match their speed, intonation, and linking of words as closely as possible, almost like being their echo.
What makes it so powerful? Why did it work so well?
Its power lies in practicing multiple aspects of spoken English at once. It trains your mouth and brain to produce connected speech, where words flow into each other naturally. It helps you internalize the natural rhythm and melody of English sentences, and it hones your ability to pick up and reproduce subtle intonation patterns that convey meaning, like whether something is a question or a statement. The author's own experience learning French is cited as an example. Consistently shadowing news broadcasts dramatically improved their French accent and fluency in a relatively short time by forcing them to mimic native speed and flow.
And how is this applied by a student in a practical way? Any examples?
Kevin from South Korea used shadowing extensively to improve his presentation skills for work. He would use TED Talks or business presentations and shadow the same 5-minute segment daily for a week, focusing intently on matching the speaker's pace, intonation, and pausing. This consistent, targeted practice helped him develop a much more confident, natural, and engaging speaking style that was essential for his professional presentations.
So pronunciation is a multifaceted skill involving individual sounds, stress, rhythm, and intonation, and there are concrete ways to work on all of them. With these skills developing, the focus naturally moves to applying them in real contexts, real-world practice, moving beyond the classroom, getting out there.
This is where the magic really starts to happen. Classroom learning provides essential foundational knowledge and controlled practice, but true speaking fluency is developed through authentic interaction in real-life situations. The key here is actively seeking out and making the most of genuine speaking opportunities, even if they feel a little intimidating at first.
And one highly recommended way to find those opportunities is through the conversation exchange revolution. Tell us about that.
This is described as a mutually beneficial and often very rewarding approach. It involves finding a language partner who is a native English speaker and who, in turn, is learning your native language. You agree to meet regularly, splitting the time equally, perhaps 30 minutes speaking English to help them practice, and 30 minutes speaking your language to help you practice.
It's a truly reciprocal relationship where both people are learners and teachers. Balanced.
Exactly. The materials share the story of Maria from Spain, who initially felt immense terror at the thought of speaking English with a native speaker. She reluctantly agreed to try a conversation exchange with Jennifer, an American who was learning Spanish. Their first few meetings were awkward, filled with hesitations and pauses, but they committed to it.
And what was the outcome of sticking with it? Did it work?
After about 6 months of consistent meetings, not only had they developed a genuine friendship, but Maria's English-speaking confidence and fluency had soared. The brilliant dynamic of this model is that you're not just the student struggling, you're also a teacher helping someone else. This shift in perspective can significantly reduce the anxiety and build confidence because you feel like you are contributing equally to the interaction.
That sense of equal footing must make a big difference. Yeah. What about finding professional speaking opportunities for those who specifically need English for their careers?
For learners focused on using English in a professional context, the advice is to actively create or seek out chances to use English at work. This might involve volunteering to give presentations in English, even if it's just to a small internal team, requesting to join international project teams, or actively participating in industry webinars or conferences where English is the common language.
This sounds like it could be high stakes and quite challenging initially. A bit scary.
It certainly can be, and that potential pressure is real. However, that challenge can also be a powerful motivator. The materials feature Ahmed from Egypt, an engineer whose day-to-day job rarely required English. He was challenged to volunteer to give one short presentation in English each month. Initially, the prospect was terrifying, but these monthly presentations became his most valuable speaking practice. The need to communicate clearly in professional context pushed him to prepare thoroughly and confront his speaking fear through repeated exposure.
Facing the fear head-on in a controlled professional environment. That makes sense. What about using English outside of purely work or formal settings? Community involvement is suggested.
Getting involved in your local community, if there are any English-speaking groups or activities available, provides natural, often lower-pressure opportunities to speak. This could mean joining clubs related to your hobbies, volunteering for a local charity that uses English, or participating in community interest groups.
How did a student successfully use this approach? Any story there?
Yuki from Japan, who was passionate about photography but very shy about speaking English, was encouraged to find a local photography club that conducted meetings in English. Initially, she mostly listened, observing the interactions, but gradually, drawn in by the shared interest and her passion for photography, she started sharing her own work and participating more actively in discussions about techniques and equipment. The common hobby provided built-in conversation topics and helped her overcome her speaking anxiety more organically through shared enthusiasm.
That highlights how connecting with something you genuinely care about can make language practice feel less like a chore and more like a natural extension of your interests. Good point. Finally, there's a particularly unconventional but insightful method, the service learning approach. What does that mean?
This involves using your English skills in situations where you are providing a service or helping others. The core insight here is that by shifting your focus away from your own language performance and onto the value or help you are providing to someone else, you naturally become much less self-conscious and anxious about your English.
So using English as a tool to make a positive impact, focusing outwards.
Exactly. The materials offer the example of Carlos from Mexico, who volunteered as a Spanish-English interpreter at a local health clinic, serving a diverse community. His English wasn't perfect, but his bilingual skills were genuinely needed by both Spanish-speaking patients and English-speaking staff. Using his English to facilitate communication and make a real difference in people's lives significantly boosted his confidence and powerfully demonstrated the practical value of his language skills.
That's a really powerful motivator, seeing your language skills help someone else. Wow. So we've explored the challenges, the foundational mindset, creating immersion, building technical skills functionally, honing pronunciation, and finding real-world practice opportunities. But what about when things inevitably go wrong, as they do in real conversation? Overcoming common speaking obstacles is a crucial part of staying on track.
It truly is. No one speaks a foreign language without encountering obstacles and moments of frustration. The key, as the materials emphasize, is recognizing these common hurdles and having specific strategies ready to navigate them when they arise, ensuring that you can keep moving forward.
One very common and deeply frustrating obstacle is the blank mind phenomenon. We've all been there.
This is that moment we talked about earlier, where you know exactly what you want to say in your native language, the idea is crystal clear in your head, but when you try to express it in English under pressure or anxiety, your mind just seems to go completely empty. Lisa from Germany's description, "It's like all my English just disappears," is the perfect illustration of this frustrating experience.
It's almost like the pressure blocks access to your vocabulary and grammar knowledge. Everything just vanishes.
That's often exactly what's happening. The cognitive load and anxiety can interfere with memory retrieval. The materials offer specific, practical strategies to combat this. One simple but effective tactic is having a few backup phrases ready in your mental toolkit.
Phrases that buy you time, little escape hatches.
Precisely. Simple phrases like, let me think about that for a moment. That's an interesting question. Could you rephrase that, please? Or even just a second. These are pre-prepared responses that keep the conversation moving, give you a few crucial seconds to compose your thoughts, and don't require complex on-the-spot formulation under pressure.
And another strategy mentioned is circumlocution. What's that?
Yes, this is the valuable skill of being able to describe something when you can't recall the exact word for it. Instead of getting stuck and falling silent because you've forgotten the word environmentalist, you can describe the concept, a person who cares a lot about protecting nature and the planet. This skill is invaluable for maintaining fluency, avoiding awkward silences, and showing that you can communicate your meaning even when your vocabulary isn't instantly available, talking around the word.
Another common challenge is the speed versus accuracy dilemma, that tension.
This is the internal conflict many learners face between wanting to speak quickly, closer to a native pace, and wanting to speak correctly without making too many errors. Students often feel they're either speaking too slowly to sound natural, or they speed up, but their clarity and accuracy suffer significantly.
The materials mentioned Thomas from Austria in relation to this struggle. What was his issue?
Thomas was very focused on achieving native-like speed in his English. However, in his rush to speak quickly, his speech became unclear, words were mumbled, and he made numerous grammatical and vocabulary errors. The insightful suggestion wasn't to simply force himself to speak slower, but to help him find his optimal speaking pace, a speed that felt comfortable enough to maintain a natural conversational flow, but still allowed him to produce clear, accurate language, finding that sweet spot.
And there's a technique related to finding that natural flow, focusing on groups of words, thought groups.
Yes, the idea of focusing on thought groups rather than trying to process and speak individual words one by one. Instead of trying to say, I think that, we should, go to the store as separate units, you learn to group words together naturally, reflecting units of meaning, like, I think that we should go to the store. This technique helps create the natural rhythm and intonation of English, and by focusing on these chunks of meaning, speakers can paradoxically often achieve a faster, yet clearer and more natural-sounding delivery.
We touched on cultural differences as an initial challenge, and they resurface here as potential obstacles in specific interactions. Makes sense.
They do, because deeply ingrained cultural communication styles can sometimes lead to misunderstanding or difficulty navigating certain situations in an English context. The example used is Kenji from Japan.
How did his cultural background create a speaking obstacle for him? What happened?
In his native culture, expressing direct disagreement with someone, particularly a senior, is often seen as impolite or confrontational. However, in many Western English-speaking business contexts, while politeness is still valued, expressing disagreement clearly and constructively is often expected and necessary for effective collaboration and decision-making. Kenji found it difficult to transition from his more indirect cultural style to the level of directness sometimes required in English business discussions.
So he needs specific tools to express disagreement without feeling rude, to bridge that gap.
Exactly. The solution involved practicing specific phrases and structures that allowed him to express disagreement or offer alternative viewpoints politely but directly within an English context. Examples include learning phrases like, "I see your point, but I have a slightly different perspective. That's an interesting idea, although I'm not entirely sure I agree," or "I understand what you're saying, and I'd like to offer an alternative viewpoint." These structures helped him participate effectively in discussions while bridging the gap between his native communication style and English expectations.
Finally, a very common and disheartening obstacle is the intermediate plateau. That frustrating feeling of being stuck, despite putting in effort. You feel like you're not improving anymore.
This is a widely experienced challenge that causes many learners to feel demotivated. They reach a comfortable intermediate level where they can communicate basic ideas and handle everyday situations. But then they feel their speaking stops improving significantly even after years of study and practice. They just sort of flatline.
What do the materials suggest is happening here? Why do people get stuck?
The insight is that this plateau often occurs because speakers become comfortable reusing the same familiar basic vocabulary, sentence structures, and grammatical patterns. They get into a rut. To move from intermediate fluency to a more advanced level, you need to actively expand your linguistic repertoire and start using more sophisticated language features. You need to push yourself.
The example provided is Sandra from Poland. How did she break through?
Sandra felt she had been stuck at an intermediate level for years, unable to make her English sound more sophisticated. An analysis of her speaking showed she was indeed relying heavily on a relatively limited set of sentence structures and vocabulary. Her breakthrough came from consciously making an effort to incorporate more complex language features into her speech.
How does she practically do that? What does she change?
It wasn't about learning completely academic or obscure language, but about adding variety and sophistication to how she expressed familiar ideas. For example, instead of consistently starting sentences with "I think," she focused on learning and using alternative phrases like, "In my opinion, from my perspective, it seems to me that," or "I'd argue that." Using these variations made her speech more engaging, demonstrated a higher level of proficiency, and helped her break through that plateau.
So recognizing these common obstacles, the blank mind, the speed-accuracy trade-off, cultural clashes, and the dreaded plateau, and having specific strategies to address each one is crucial for sustained progress. Once you've built a solid foundation, can practice effectively, and know how to navigate common difficulties, the focus can shift to advanced strategies for sophisticated communication, moving beyond just getting by.
This is where the goal moves beyond just being understood to being able to communicate with nuance, artistry, and influence in English, really stepping it up.
What does that involve at an advanced level? Mastering conversational strategies is listed first. What are those?
At an advanced level, effective speaking isn't just about the correctness of your sentences, it's about how you manage the conversation itself. This includes skills like smoothly introducing new topics, maintaining your listener's interest, knowing how to gracefully handle disagreements, guiding a discussion, and even navigating social dynamics within a conversation. It's about the interaction itself.
There's a specific example related to professional networking. Roberto again.
Yes, Roberto from Brazil, who we mentioned earlier in the context of creating Immersion. At a more advanced stage, he focused on developing sophisticated networking skills for international business conferences. This involved practicing strategies for confidently approaching strangers, introducing himself and his work effectively, asking insightful, open-ended questions to keep the conversation flowing, and knowing how to politely and smoothly conclude a conversation and move on when appropriate. All those subtle skills.
And a particular technique mentioned, the bridge and pivot. That sounds useful.
That's a very useful, advanced conversational technique. It involves acknowledging the point the other person has just made, the bridge, and then smoothly transitioning to a related point of your own, the pivot. For example, saying, "That's a really interesting point about market trends, bridge. And speaking of trends, I've noticed something similar happening in our industry pivot." This technique makes you sound attentive and helps you steer the conversation effectively, which proved very valuable for Roberto in his networking efforts.
That sounds like a practical skill for anyone in a professional setting. Definitely. Another intriguing idea is developing your English-speaking persona. What does that mean exactly?
This acknowledges something many advanced learners observe. They might feel like they express themselves slightly differently, perhaps even revealing different facets of their personality when speaking English compared to their native language. The material suggests that instead of viewing this as inauthenticity, you can embrace it as a valid and potentially powerful aspect of your communication.
So it's not about becoming someone else, but perhaps discovering a different side of yourself that the English language helps bring out, like a different version.
Exactly. Isabella from Italy is mentioned, who noticed that she felt funnier, more extroverted, and more willing to use sarcasm when speaking English than she did in Italian. Initially, this difference concerned her, but she was encouraged to see it not as a negative, but as the confident, humorous, engaging version of herself that emerged when she spoke English. Actively working on developing and feeling comfortable with this English-speaking persona can be quite liberating and empowering.
That's a truly fascinating perspective on language identity. Interesting. Storytelling and narrative skills are also highlighted as a mark of advanced fluency.
Humans are inherently drawn to stories. The ability to tell engaging anecdotes, recount experiences, or structure compelling narratives in English is a clear sign of advanced fluency. It makes your communication more memorable, helps you build rapport and connect with your audience on a deeper level, and demonstrates sophisticated language use.
How was this applied by a student? Paulo, was it?
Paulo from Portugal, an academic, focused on developing his storytelling skills specifically for structuring more compelling presentations and lectures in English. This involved learning techniques for setting the scene effectively, building tension or interest, organizing information logically as a narrative arc, and delivering a clear, impactful conclusion. And the materials note that there are often cultural considerations in effective English storytelling.
Yes. English-speaking audiences, particularly in formal or professional contexts, often expect stories and narratives to follow a relatively clear linear structure with explicit connections between ideas and direct conclusions. This can differ from storytelling styles in other cultures, where more indirectness, circularity, or reliance on implied meaning might be common. Adapting to these expectations is key for advanced speakers.
Finally, a skill that is both challenging and incredibly rewarding at an advanced level. Humor and cultural references, the tricky stuff.
Humor is notoriously difficult to master in a foreign language because it's so deeply rooted in culture, context, and subtle language use. But English-speaking cultures, both socially and as an aspect of communication, can leave advanced speakers feeling somewhat on the outside.
The example given is Chen from Taiwan. What was his situation? Chen was a highly intelligent and proficient English speaker in his professional field, but he felt disconnected from the casual conversations and team bonding at his workplace because he often didn't understand the jokes, puns, or cultural references being used. To address this, he made a conscious effort to learn about different types of English humor, identifying wordplay, recognizing irony, understanding self-deprecating humor, and picking up on common cultural references from media or current events.
But learning how to appropriately respond or use humor himself, not just understand it.
Yes, this was a key part of his development. It involved understanding when humor was appropriate in a given context, practicing using gentle, often self-deprecating humor if comfortable, and, importantly, learning how to respond appropriately when others made jokes, even if he didn't fully grasp every nuance or find it personally funny. It's about learning to participate in that crucial social lubricant of conversation.
These advanced strategies really underscore that fluency is about much more than just linguistic correctness. It's about navigating the complexities of human interaction and cultural context in English. Now, let's turn our attention to something incredibly relevant in today's world: leveraging technology. Modern tools offer powerful new opportunities for practice that weren't available just a few years ago.
They truly do. The digital landscape has opened up numerous avenues for improving speaking skills, often in ways that are convenient and accessible.
One of the most rapidly evolving areas seems to be AI conversation partners. How can they help?
The potential here is revolutionary. AI-powered language tutors or conversation bots offer significant advantages. They are available 24/7, allowing for practice anytime you have a spare moment. Crucially, they are non-judgmental. You can make mistakes, hesitate, repeat yourself, and practice the same phrase or scenario dozens of times without any fear of embarrassment or feeling like you're wasting someone's time. Patient practice.
And there's a student example of someone using this effectively. Fatima.
Fatima from Morocco used AI conversation tools specifically to prepare for job interviews. She could simulate interview scenarios, practice answering common and challenging questions, and get immediate feedback on her fluency, vocabulary, and even pronunciation from the AI. This targeted, repetitive practice in a low-stakes environment was incredibly helpful in building her confidence for the actual interviews.
However, the materials add a very important point about AI, a crucial caveat.
Yes. It's vital to see AI as a powerful supplement to, but not a replacement for, human interaction. While AI is excellent for structured practice, drilling, and overcoming the fear of making mistakes, it cannot fully replicate the richness, spontaneity, cultural nuances, emotional intelligence, and the real-time adaptability required in genuine human conversation. Interacting with other people remains absolutely essential for developing well-rounded communication skills. You need both.
Speaking of real-time interaction, video conferencing skills have become indispensable, especially in the era of remote work and global teams. We're all doing it more.
Absolutely. Speaking English via video call presents unique challenges compared to in-person conversation.
Right.
You have less access to subtle body language cues, potential issues with audio lag or connection quality, and the need to maintain presence and engagement through a screen.
The materials discuss specific strategies for this, using Antonio from Spain as an example. What were his challenges?
Antonio initially found video calls difficult because he was used to relying heavily on physical gestures and full body language when he spoke, many of which weren't clearly visible on camera. They worked on adapting his communication style to the medium by focusing on even clearer verbal communication, using more expressive vocal variety, changes in pitch, pace, and volume, and incorporating strategic visible gestures that could be seen within the frame, adapting to the screen.
And managing the technical aspects of the call itself, like lag and interruptions.
Yes, practicing skills like navigating audio lag by waiting slightly longer before responding to avoid talking over someone, learning how to interrupt gracefully when necessary without causing disruption. Excuse me, or could I just jump in quickly? And finding ways to keep remote listeners engaged despite the lack of physical presence. These skills are increasingly valuable in our connected professional lives.
Another creative, tech-driven practice method is podcast and video creation, making your own stuff.
This involves creating your own content in English, whether it's starting a small podcast on a topic you love, making short YouTube videos, or simply recording yourself giving presentations or explaining concepts. It's highlighted as an excellent way to practice producing continuous speech in a structured way, and, importantly, provides you with material to review your own performance.
How did Diana from Ukraine use this approach? Did it work for her?
Diana started a YouTube channel sharing her experiences as an international student studying abroad. Initially, she felt very self-conscious and her videos felt stiff and overly scripted. But through the process of consistently creating content, planning what she wanted to say, filming it, and reviewing the recordings, she gradually developed a much more natural, conversational, and confident speaking style over time.
And the ability to review your own recordings must be invaluable, seeing yourself as others do.
It is. Listening or watching yourself allows you to objectively identify areas where you hesitate, where your pronunciation could be clearer, or where your phrasing is awkward. It's a powerful tool for self-correction and, importantly, a fantastic way to visually and audibly track your own improvement over time, which is a significant confidence booster.
Finally, social media engagement can also be leveraged for speaking practice, but not just scrolling, right?
This isn't about endless passive scrolling, but using social media platforms strategically for real-time or near real-time speaking practice. This might involve participating in live audio or video discussions, like on Twitter Spaces or Clubhouse, sending voice messages instead of typing text replies, or engaging in online communities where quick, natural spoken responses are part of the interaction.
Miguel from Chile's experience is mentioned here. How did he use it?
Miguel joined English-language Twitter communities related to his professional field. Initially, he was purely a reader, absorbing the information. But gradually, he started participating, first through text and then by joining live audio discussions. The real-time, dynamic nature of these conversations pushed him to develop the ability to formulate quick, natural responses on the spot, using language in a context that was both professionally relevant and socially dynamic, thinking on his feet.
It's clear technology offers a really diverse toolkit for weaving English-speaking practice into many different aspects of your life, often outside of formal learning. So pulling all these threads together, the materials emphasize that achieving and maintaining fluency isn't a one-time achievement, but an ongoing journey. Building long-term speaking fluency requires a particular kind of mindset and commitment. It never really stops.
It really is important to view fluency as a skill that requires continuous engagement and development, much like maintaining physical fitness or any other skill. It's not a destination where you arrive and then stop working.
And this necessitates cultivating the maintenance mindset, keeping it going.
Yes. A common pitfall is for learners to reach a specific goal, perhaps passing an exam, getting a job, or feeling comfortable in certain situations, and then reduce or stop active practice. The materials stress that language skills, especially speaking, require ongoing maintenance. If you stop using it actively, fluency can regress over time. Use it or lose it, basically.
The example is Sarah from Finland. What was her story?
Sarah reached her desired level of English for her professional goals, but she genuinely enjoyed using the language, so she continued practicing consistently, even if it was just for relatively short periods each day. By maintaining this consistent engagement, even with as little as 15 minutes of active practice daily, as the materials suggest, her English didn't just stay functional. It continued to evolve and became truly eloquent and sophisticated over the next 5 years, making her an incredibly effective international communicator.
Consistency, even in small doses, sounds incredibly powerful over the long term. And related to maintenance is the idea of continuous challenge and growth, avoiding the comfort zone.
The materials strongly argue that staying comfortably within your current linguistic abilities is the enemy of further development. To continue growing and refining your speaking skills, you need to actively seek out new challenges that push you slightly beyond your comfort zone. Keep stretching yourself.
Like James from South Korea, who we mentioned earlier, what was his challenge?
Exactly. After becoming very comfortable and fluent in his work-related English, he sought a new challenge by intentionally focusing on developing his social English, the language needed for making friends, engaging in casual banter, and navigating informal social situations. This required learning different vocabulary, more colloquial expressions, and mastering more informal sentence structures than he used at work. This new challenge reignited his learning motivation and, importantly, opened up completely new social opportunities for him.
Pushing your boundaries into different domains of communication, that's key. Another often overlooked way to solidify your own skills is by teaching others. Helping someone else helps you.
This is presented as a highly effective method for reinforcing your own understanding and significantly boosting your confidence. When you have to explain a grammar concept, clarify vocabulary, or help someone else formulate a sentence in English, it forces you to articulate what you know clearly. It makes you consciously think about how the language works in a way you might not when just using it yourself.
And the student example supporting this is Elena from Russia. How did teaching help her?
Elena started volunteering to help other immigrants in her community practice English conversation. The act of teaching and guiding others forced her to consolidate her own knowledge, think on her feet, and explain things clearly. This experience of sharing her skills and seeing others improve because of her help dramatically increased her own confidence in her English abilities and empowered her to take on even more challenging speaking situations.
That makes perfect sense. Explaining something to someone else solidifies your own grasp of it. It really locks it in. And woven through all of these strategies, especially at higher levels, is the crucial concept of cultural intelligence, the hidden dimension, the stuff beyond words.
This is perhaps the most nuanced layer of effective communication. Language and culture are deeply, fundamentally intertwined. Achieving true fluency, and particularly sophistication in English speaking, isn't just about mastering the words and grammar, it's about understanding how culture influences communication styles, expectations, and even how meaning is conveyed and interpreted.
This includes things like reading between the lines, understanding the subtext.
Absolutely. English-speaking cultures, particularly in certain social or professional contexts, often rely on indirect communication, politeness strategies, and subtle subtext. Learning to recognize and understand these implied meanings is crucial for truly effective communication, especially at higher levels. For example, understanding that someone saying, "That's interesting," might not be genuine fascination, but a polite, indirect way of expressing disagreement, or that "we should do lunch sometime" is often just a polite closing phrase rather than a concrete invitation, decoding the real meaning.
And the materials provide an example of how misunderstanding this indirectness can cause problems. Akiko.
Akiko from Japan initially took many English statements very literally, which sometimes led to confusion or misinterpretations in her workplace interactions. By consciously working on recognizing common patterns of indirect communication and understanding their actual meaning and context, perhaps, by observing native speakers or asking clarifying questions when unsure, her workplace relationships and her ability to navigate subtle dynamics improved significantly. The materials also briefly touch upon adapting communication styles for different English-speaking cultures for truly advanced speakers, recognizing the variety.
Yes, acknowledging that there isn't just one single English-speaking culture. There are variations between, say, American directness and efficiency in business communication versus perhaps a greater emphasis on understatement or formal politeness in some British contexts. For highly advanced speakers, developing the awareness and flexibility to subtly adapt their style depending on who they're speaking with and the specific cultural context can lead to even more effective and harmonious interactions.
And ultimately, drawing from all these insights, what is presented as the overarching goal of all this work on improving English speaking? Where does it all lead?
The materials conclude this section by emphasizing that the ultimate goal isn't just linguistic perfection, but building empathy and connection. Effective communication, whether in English or any language, is fundamentally about connecting with other people, understanding different perspectives, building relationships, and being able to contribute meaningfully to conversations and communities. It's about using language as a powerful bridge.
That brings us to the conclusion of this deep dive into improving your English-speaking skills. It's clear this is a deeply personal journey for every individual learner.
It truly is. The insights we've explored underscore that there is no single magic bullet or one-size-fits-all path to fluency. Every learner brings their own unique background, their own strengths, specific challenges, and personal goals. What proves most effective for one person might need significant adaptation for another.
And that foundational element of mindset and confidence is consistently presented as absolutely essential. It all starts there.
It seems without the courage to simply speak, to put yourself out there despite the inevitable imperfections, even the most extensive vocabulary or perfect grammar won't truly allow you to connect with anyone.
And consistent practice, using a varied toolkit of techniques, creating immersion, practicing self-talk, focusing grammar and vocabulary functionally, shadowing, actively seeking out real-world opportunities is vital for sustained progress.
And remembering that encountering obstacles like the blank mind or hitting a plateau is a completely normal part of the process, not a sign of failure, is key to persisting. Keep going.
The insights we've discussed reiterate that the ultimate objective isn't necessarily to sound exactly like a native speaker, but to communicate effectively, confidently, and authentically, finding your own voice in English.
Your unique background, your own accent, your cultural perspective, these aren't things to hide. They are assets that add to the incredible richness and diversity of the global English-speaking community. Bring who you are.
As you continue your own journey, the materials encourage patience with yourself, actively celebrating those small victories along the way, and truly trying to enjoy the process of learning and growth. Language learning opens up so many incredible doors to new relationships, new opportunities, and new ways of understanding the world.
And for a final provocative thought from these materials for you to consider, every single conversation you have, no matter how brief or seemingly insignificant, is a valuable opportunity to learn and grow. And embracing imperfection, allowing yourself to be less than perfect in the moment, is perhaps the single most important key to actually making progress. So what small step can you take today to create just one English-speaking moment for yourself?
A moment to practice, to connect, and to grow.
That wraps up this deep dive into improving your English-speaking skills. We really hope these insights provide you with some concrete ideas and renewed motivation for your own unique journey. If you found this deep dive valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel.